The video you're about to watch is hands down the most raw, personal and vulnerable video I have ever uploaded to this channel. I've been uploading videos since 2016. I've never uploaded anything like this, and to tell you the truth, the video I am uploading, the video you're about to watch, it does kind of scare me to post this online because it is so personal to me. It's unscripted, it's unedited, and I'm talking about my entire journey going through healing what is the most one of the few points of trauma in my life, one of the most intense points of trauma, which is my relationship with my father, otherwise known as the father wound. In the entire video, I take you from the start of my journey, where it began, the whole process I went through to heal my father wound. So my hope is with this video that you get something from it. My hope is that I can set an example that it's okay to talk about this stuff. It's okay to feel things. The world isn't going to cave in because you shed some tears, which does happen. And that if you really want to heal and move past this stuff, you're going to have to feel some uncomfortable stuff. You're going to have to go to places that are uncomfortable, and you're going to have to do the difficult work. But it's worth it in the end. So that is my hope for this video. I hope that you watch it all the way through. If you're a guy and you suspect that you've got some things you need to work on, emotional stuff you need to work on, I highly, highly recommend you watch the entire video. I hope it makes a difference. I hope it sets an example. Peace and enjoy. I used to hate my father, and I'm not saying that lightly. I used to fucking hate that man. And it's so painful for me to actually say that, just to hear those words come out my mouth, because I feel the level of love, like genuine love I feel for the man right now, it makes me almost ashamed to say that I used to hate him. But the truth is I did. I had so much pain that I'd not addressed, and so much venom and hatred and just anger, raw anger towards him that I'd never actually been in contact with, that it was polluting every area of my life, and I really felt that towards him. But let's back up a bit. Let's go to the beginning. I had a fairly challenging upbringing in some respects. My parents, my mum and my dad, they did their best to, make my childhood as good as it could have been. And there were good moments. But growing up, I experienced a lot of stuff that really fucked me up in hindsight. Things like domestic violence, right? Things like crime, death, just the arguments, and I go a bit blank thinking about it now because it brings up a lot. I remember when I was a kid having panic attacks, or like the closest thing to a panic attack, like almost a panic attack, being sat upstairs in my bedroom listening to my parents arguing downstairs, throwing stuff and whatnot. And I would think about that, and I'd sort of like put my hands over my ears and try not to listen to it. So that was pretty challenging, obviously. But about my dad, I was always scared of him. I always saw him as he's a very big, at least when I was a kid, a very big, intimidating man. Very competent, very powerful, very capable, but also was able to command a room socially. He could make you feel like you were this small. And ever since I was a kid, I was afraid of him. I was scared of him. I was intimidated by him. I felt like I was insignificant in his eyes. When I was a kid, I never actually felt his love, really. I felt his criticism. I felt his judgment. I felt like when I was walking around as a kid, there was just his eyes were on me, just no matter what I did. And I felt like nothing I ever did was ever good enough. But it was mostly this feeling that I was crushed. I was always this small, and my word didn't mean anything. I always felt like he didn't care. I always felt like he wasn't interested in what I had to do or say or anything. And I thought this was normal, and to not actually feel like a connection to your father, to feel like a sense of love and like a a real loving relationship with your father. I always thought that was normal. So I grew up with that. No problem. I just thought, okay, it's just the cards I've been dealt, whatever. I mean, don't get me wrong, throughout my childhood I was always getting traumatized, pretty much in like very small ways, constantly. But I just sort of didn't know any different at the time, so I just carried on. So when the thing that changed everything though, the thing that really created the biggest pain, the biggest source of trauma, the thing that really created the father wound that I would later heal, was around the age of 14. And some of you guys watching this channel now, you've probably been watching me for a little while now, and you know this happened to me. But when I was 14, my mum died. She died of pancreatic cancer. I came home from jiu-jitsu training, because I trained Japanese jiu-jitsu when I was like 13, 14. It was my first martial art I ever did. I came back home and my dad and my brother were just sat there, and they just sat me down and just told me that, said, Oliver, your mum's been diagnosed with cancer and it doesn't look good. And there was just silence in the room, and then I just went upstairs and I think I just went to sleep. And I didn't really understand it. But I'm not going to talk in depth about what happened to me there. But what I will say is she died 6 weeks later. And then after that, I entered a period where I have never felt so alone in my entire life. Suddenly the world became, I mean, I wasn't in a good state before that. Like, I wasn't having a good time in life anyway. As I said earlier, I had some good moments in childhood, but up to that age, I was a pretty fucked up kid in some respects, and I had a pretty fucked up view of the world, but that just intensified it so much more. I was always afraid as a kid, but that just turned it up to another level. All of a sudden, within 6 weeks, the world became frightening, like truly frightening. Existence became frightening. I didn't understand what happened. 1 minute my mum was alive, talking to us. Within 2 weeks, she was yellow and didn't understand who I was, because that's pancreatic cancer is a fucking bitch, by the way. And then 2 weeks after that, she was completely incapacitated in bed at home. They brought her home from the hospital, and then 2 weeks after that, she died. And then all of a sudden, she wasn't there anymore. After that, my father pulled me out of school, and for some reason, we went in a motorhome and drove across to Ibiza. We lived in Ibiza in a motorhome for like 6 months or so. I still can't remember the exact dates. But we were living in a motorhome for some reason for 6 months in Ibiza after that. So I was pulled, not only did I lose my mum, I was pulled out of my routine and away from everyone I knew. And I lived in Ibiza in this motorhome, and I wasn't in school. And I was just spending the time playing Elder Scrolls Oblivion on my PS3, because video games were just the only escape I had at the time. And I was just drinking excessively, even as a 15-year-old kid. And the point is, I didn't feel any connection to my dad at all. My dad became, he went really into being, well, he was an alcoholic after that. He drank before, but then he went further away. The point is, at that time, I needed my father so much. I needed him more than ever. I needed him, I needed my older brother, my older brother was also dealing with the bereavement in his own way. He was back in the UK, trying to survive. So the death of my mum created such it just blew the family apart. And everyone just sort of isolated in their own bubble, in their own mind, me included. So I needed my father, and I didn't have him. And what that did was highlighted and brought to light the years, the whole childhood worth of inadequacy from him. Like, it was like I didn't see him as a father that I needed all the way through childhood, but I was okay with it. I was like, whatever, I'm just going to be independent, and I'm going to sort things out myself and figure life out myself. But then when my mum died, it's like I couldn't be independent. Like, I didn't have the resources, and I really needed him, and he wasn't there. And that highlighted how he's never been there, and that gave gave rise to this anger that I talked about at the start of the video. This real anger, this like... The anger was covering up a deep, deep, deep pain, though. But the anger was on top of it. The anger was there as a protection mechanism. It was like trying to protect me, trying to take care of me, trying to like further my interests. Like I deserve to have people, I want to have people in my life that take care of me and stuff at the time. So to be angry about it is almost healthy, but I just repressed it. So I repressed it from the age of like 14 when my mum died, and I repressed that anger for an extremely long time. After my mum died, for the years that followed, eventually I came back from Ibiza and tried to settle into a routine and stuff. But the point is, I went numb emotionally, like completely numb. Like it was a weird trauma response. I dissociated from my emotions, from my life. I completely just zoned out. And that's why I became like a Peter Pan. I became like a man-child. I became like floaty and flighty, and I liked fantasy, and I liked playing video games, and I didn't want to ground myself in reality, because reality was too fucking painful. Reality was too difficult, challenging, painful, traumatic, horrible, disappointing. People around you didn't take care of you, etc. That's what my reality meant. So I just wanted to just disappear from all of it. But then it became apparent to me, like in my 20s, when I started, like my age started going on, I started getting older, and I started realizing that, holy shit, I'm actually stuck psychologically. Like I was struggling with my self-esteem. I kept on following this same pattern where I wasn't moving on in life. I wasn't developing. Like I looked at the people around me, my friends and stuff, and they seemed to be just getting along fine. They were holding down jobs, and I was always kind of like going half-assed with every job I did, pretty much. But I was seeing people get married, I was seeing people have kids and move on with their lives, but there was me still stuck in one weird little cycle where I couldn't get past it. I felt inadequate, I felt ashamed of myself, I felt I had real low self-esteem, and I had this like chronic anxiety. And it's very clear at the time, it became clear that I was just carrying around this trauma, this backpack full of shit that I'd not dealt with, I'd never actually processed. And it felt like a pack of dogs nipping at my heels constantly. Wherever I went, there was just this pack of dogs just following me. And then when I'd start to go in a new direction, all these dogs would just sick on me and just start biting me and fucking pull me back to this place where I just comfortable suffering, really. So I had this pattern where I would, and around this time, like I came back from Ibiza and I basically lived with my father on and off, and I had this pattern where I'd leave my dad, right, and then I'd leave for like a year or whatever. I lived in London for a bit, and then I came back. I moved away. I went to Australia to travel for a while, and then I suffered like a motherfucker because I had all this trauma, and then I came back. And then I kept leaving and coming back. It was almost like my dad had this gravitational pull around him that I just couldn't escape him. Even though I felt such trauma and such anger and hatred and pain and hurt and whatnot, I couldn't escape it for some reason. And I realised that that's because if we have a wound in us, like an emotional trauma wound that wants to be processed, that means that it's almost like our mind will pull us back to that place until we deal with it. And I didn't know that at the time. And that was until, though, I moved away to Lisbon. I moved from the UK. I lived in an apartment on my own, which my dad was paying for. And then I got a job, luckily, in Portugal with a startup. So I moved to Lisbon, and I stayed there I was there for like a year and a half. But then something really traumatic happened, really, actually. I suddenly developed a panic disorder. In the middle of Lisbon, I started having panic attacks for no reason. Now, the reason I was getting panic attacks was that usually around this time, I would feel the panic start creeping up and I would go back to my dad. That's what happened. In every other situation, I eventually just left and went back to my father. This time, I knew, something in me knew If I go back to my dad again, if I leave Lisbon and all the opportunities I've created and all the work I've done and all the people I've met, if I leave all this and go back to my dad, that is spiritual suicide. So I just stayed in Lisbon and just weathered the storm and let these panic attacks come. And for like a month, it was like March 2022, I think, 2023 maybe, I can't quite remember. No, 2022. I'd basically lost my mind for a month. But what was coming up in the midst of all these panic attacks were thoughts of my mum, were thoughts of my dad, memories of my dad not being there, memories of me as a kid wanting my dad to come and watch me play a video game, but he didn't because he was in the pub getting fucking drunk. And all these memories came to me. It was really weird at the time because I was there in Lisbon and I thought I was over all of this trauma. I thought I was over all of it and done, but I wasn't. All this stuff just came up again for me to process, for me to deal with. And I was crying my fucking eyes out at the time. It was really weird. I was having panic attack. And then as the panic started to subside, I just have these crying fits where my whole body was just fucking shaking. That, as I realize it now, was just trauma being processed in the body. My inner child both hated my dad, but also wanted his protection and wanted to go back to him. The adult in me at the time said, no, we're not going back to my dad. We're not going back to dad. We are going to stay here. We're going to be an independent adult. And my inner child was just processing all this fucking trauma. He was throwing a tantrum. And it was up to me to be with him and to love him. And that's eventually what happened. The panic subsided. And I developed as an adult. And I started processing the trauma. And in this process, I came across the term father wound. I learned about it, right? And I don't get me wrong, I've not dived into it like crazy and read shitloads of books about it or anything, but it resonated with me. And I came across a type of therapy called internal family systems therapy. And again, it's not like I worked with an IFS therapist for years or whatever like that. It's not as if I read shitloads of books on it. I just knew deep down that it made sense to me. That there was the me, and it felt like there was another part of me that got super emotional and freaked out and had a trauma response. And that part of me was different to the part of me that, for example, is talking right now. So when and I came across internal family systems therapy, the idea of that therapy is that we're not just one mind, we have multiple parts of our mind, and they all interact with each other, and they all have a relationship to each other and to you, right? It sounds really trippy, but it makes sense. Like if you really read about it, it's really on point. So the reason I'm talking about this is that IFS therapy, internal family systems therapy, gave me an idea that there was a part of me that was still traumatized. There was a part of me that still hated my dad. There was a part of me that was still in serious pain. And when I did start working with a therapist about this, not an IFS therapist, but I started to be able to relate in this way. I realized that my wounded inner child was not like 6 or 7 or 8. My wounded inner child, when I really pinpointed it, was not a wounded child at all. My inner child was actually an inner teenager. He was 14 years old, and the deepest wound, I learned this, the deepest wound that I had was when I was 14, was when my mum died and nobody was there for me. And that was the wound. And when I contacted that was my father wound. Okay, that was how it manifested for me, because I needed my father so much and he wasn't there. And that's why I hated him so much. That's why I was angry at him. I wasn't angry at him, I was hurt, I was wounded. So me healing my father wound was, like when I started to heal my father wound, that was the result of connecting with the hurt, wounded teenager in me around the age of 14 who just lost his mum, who needed his dad, and who didn't have his dad. And he was just trying to make sense of the world and no one was there for him. So my healing process, I'm getting a bit emotional thinking about it now actually, is that I contacted that 14-year-old and within me, and I promise you this works. It sounds really fucking weird, but I promise you it works. You contact that 14-year-old within you and you promise to be there for him in all the ways that his own father wasn't. And when I started doing that, not only did I felt something in me deep start to heal, like energetically through my body, things started to heal. Like it seemed like these broken, fucked up parts of me that had been fucked up for so long that they just felt like me were healing. And it's like I started to see through the clouds, the black clouds that had been there my whole life in the sky. I started to see the blue sky through it. And I actually started to heal this shit. And you know what's really interesting? By doing this within myself, I noticed when I'd go back from Lisbon, I'd go back to visit my father, our conversations would start being different. I'd notice my dad would seem to be on his own healing journey, which is strange because I thought that this man would be so deep within himself that he was a lost cause. That's what I genuinely thought at the time. But I kept going back to see my dad, and he would start talking about the past. He'd start talking about my mum in ways he never did before. One night, he even had a conversation with me and my older brother and apologised for not being there for us. And I didn't initiate that conversation. Don't get me wrong, when I was younger, I always wanted that conversation, but it never materialised. So I just let go of the hope of ever having that conversation ever. But it eventually happened. And don't get me wrong, I felt very uncomfortable in that conversation because I wasn't prepared for it, but it happened. And the amazing thing was, the more I did this work on myself, to be there for my own wounded teenager within, the more love I started to genuinely feel for my father. Not like a fake love, not like I love him because he's my dad or anything like that, but like a genuine feeling of warmth and love for him. Because when I started to process my own pain and let it go, I felt like I actually had the space to empathise with him and be like, shit, what did he go through when he was a kid? And I learned that my father was beaten by his father. So how the hell would my father have the knowledge, the language, the ability to actually be there for me during grief? He'd never been taught how to grieve properly. He was beaten by his father. No one ever taught him. This man was a kid who, and also, I forgot to mention this, my father lost his mum when he was a boy. Right? My father lost his mum at around the age of 8 or 9, and it was 13, and his father, my granddad, tried to commit suicide multiple times. And my dad had to prevent that from happening as a boy. Again, I get emotional thinking about it because what my dad had to go through. So you see how by doing the work on myself, it allowed me to empathise deeply with my dad. Deeply with my dad. And be like, shit man, I'm sorry you went through that. And also I'm sorry I ever judged you, and I'm sorry I ever hated you. I'm sorry I was ever angry at you. So by doing this, it allowed me to be with my own pain and relax with it and be like, yeah, and cry with it if I need to, but also be there for my dad's pain too. And empathise with him and forgive him. In the past, I had tried to forgive my dad, right? I had tried to, but it was a logical, shallow forgiveness, only intellectual. It was like, he's been through some stuff, so there, but I didn't feel it, not in the body, not emotionally. But this time it was different. It was like I felt it. I feel this full-bodied forgiveness. And that completely changed our relationship. all because of this internal process I did on myself. I didn't demand him to be different. I didn't demand him to, you should validate me, you should talk to me about this, and I didn't do any of that. The healing I did with my father wound was completely internal. It was 100% within me, all of it. And it 100% changed our relationship. And I'm going to tell you something now that's going to probably make me cry, but a few months ago I left the UK. I went from Lisbon to the UK to see my father for a month and see my family. And then from there I went to Thailand, and I was leaving to come and see Southeast Asia, which is something I wanted to do since I was very young, actually. And how I knew that my relationship with my father has changed to a point where I just love the man. Like, and it's also mutual, and he's getting the language to love me as well. I was sat in a coffee shop, and he really fucking blindsided me with this message on WhatsApp, and it blindsided me because I almost burst out crying. Actually, I did cry in the coffee shop, but I managed to keep it under wraps. I was sat there and I was just doing some work and writing in my journal, and I got a message through saying, "Oliver, I love you. I hope you have a day that I would make for you." Fuck. And I don't know why that gets me so much. I don't know why that gets me so much, even now. I hope you have a day that I would make for you. I think the reason that gets me so much is because it's almost like he's saying that if I had the language, if I had the ability, if I knew how to love you, to show you that I loved you, I would. And I think the reason it gets me so much is because it just validates so much of what I suspected in the past, but never understood, never really felt, which is that if the man could say, if he had the language, if he had the ability to show me that he loved me, he would. But he was never taught the language. He was never showed how. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love me, But then he told me that on WhatsApp. A day that I would make for you. I hope you have a day that I would make for you. I felt his protection. I felt his love. I felt his care. I felt his warmth. Just in those words alone. And you can imagine from this reaction, I was just sat there in the coffee shop and I was like, fuck. I was like filling my half empty flat white full of tears, just like, oh, fuck's sake. So it's so remarkable to me how I can go over the span of years from hating this man and seeing nothing but inadequacy and you're not enough, you're a bad father, and feeling those judgments towards him. It's just crazy how I can go from that to thinking of the man and actually genuinely loving him. And thinking, fuck, like I want the best for him. I care about him so much. I'm in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia right now. He's back in the UK, and I even worry about him, which scares me, but it also feels good because I actually give a fuck about him. Because all the while I was trying to be independent throughout my whole life, but it wasn't coming from a place of love. it was coming from a place of fear. It was like, I need to be independent because no one's going to take care of me, right? No one's going to be there for me. But now it comes from a place of love. So this brings us to the present day, man. If you're a bloke watching this, fuck it, if you're a woman watching this and you've got a father wound or whatever, and you've got a relationship with your dad where you've got, there's something there, there's some hatred, some anger, some whatever. I'm not telling you that you can heal, like going through this process for yourself. I'm not going to tell you that you can heal your relationship and it's going to be all great, all roses at the end of it. Because the truth is, as far as I can tell, there's just some men out there, some fathers that won't meet you there, right? They just won't meet you in that space. But what I will say is, by doing this work on yourself and addressing this wound on an emotional level and really having the courage, because it takes fucking courage to go there, having the courage to actually go there, it's the best chance you've got of finding a sense of peace and forgiveness and love towards him. And as far as I can tell, that's the best possible thing you can do with your time on this earth, right? Because any moment, every moment I spent hating him, every moment I spent in venomous judgment was wasted. It was wasted time. Because I don't know how long he's got left, right? I don't know how long I've got left. Neither do you with your father. You don't know how long he's going to be here for. So wouldn't you rather spend that time, loving the guy? I think one of the most important things a man can do is heal his relationship to his dad. I really do. When you do that, you interrupt the generational trauma cycle. My grandfather was traumatized. Fuck knows what that guy had been through. He passed his trauma onto my dad with a belt or a fist or a backhand or whatever. He passed his trauma onto my dad. My dad inherited, as a boy, that trauma. My dad did better than his father. He didn't beat me. He never laid a finger on me. He did his best, but it still hurt me. He passed that share of the trauma onto me. And by intentionally healing this, I interrupted the trauma cycle as much as I possibly could. Now, when I have children, when I have my boys, in my mind, I might have daughters, I don't know. When I have children, they won't get as much of that. They'll get some of it, I think, but they won't get all of it. So I'm going to close this video now because I've been talking for a long time. It's like a podcast. But if you have a father wound, if you have some issues with your father, I invite you to do the work. I invite you to join me in this, to do the work on healing the relationship with your father, because it will change your life. I promise you that. It will change your fucking life in the most profound way. You'll have more self-esteem. You'll be able to trust yourself more. You'll feel more grounded. You'll feel less emotionally reactive. You'll feel calmer, more centered, more sure of yourself. That's why I think every man should do it. Anyway, that's me for today. I appreciate you for watching. If you've watched this long, appreciate you. I was going to say holding this space, but it's just the camera I'm talking to. But peace and love to you, and I wish you well in your healing journey, in your growth journey. All right. Take care of yourself, and if you need any help or anything, just pop a comment down below or send me an email or something. And yeah, honestly, I wish you the best. I really do. Take care, all right?